Welcome to Bread and Butter, the show looking behind the scenes of the hospitality business. I'm Wendy Hargreaves, and this show is brought to you by the Aussie tech company helping hospo thrive, HungryHungry. It's a huge show today, crossing to hospitality movers and shakers around the world, and of course right here in Australia. But first, let's look at this week's hospitality news, thanks to HungryHungry. New data shows that Victorian restaurants it's information Victorian restaurants have known for months and months. Business is bad. Average revenues have dropped 44% for Melbourne restaurants in September compared to January. The data compiled by software company Lightspeed paints a bleak picture for Victorian hospitality compared to solid revenue growth in the rest of Australia. New South Wales hospitality venues enjoyed an 8% boost to revenue year on year, while in South Australia, revenues increased 13.8%. And in Western Australia, where up to 100 people have been dining indoors since June, average revenue jumped 23.4% in September compared with the same time last year. Back in Victoria, after 7 months of lockdown pain, there's a little glimmer of hope because average revenues in Victorian hospo venues went up 8% compared to the month before, reflecting the looser restrictions in regional Victoria. Further research by the University of Canberra shows how consumer habits are changing under lockdown. The data provides important insights on running a hospitality business in the COVID world, and I'll be talking with one of the key players in that research later in the show. In other news this week, Sorrento restaurateur Julian Gurner filed a written statement of claim at the Melbourne Registry of the High Court of Australia to challenge the validity of Premier Daniel Andrews' lockdown in Melbourne. As Melburnians brace for extended lockdown restrictions, Mr Gurner and his legal team are seeking an expedited hearing before the High Court, claiming Victorian government regulations have denied basic freedoms under the Australian Constitution. Hopes of an early end to the Melbourne lockdown are fading as Premier Andrews continues to dodge questions on his plan for reopening. But overseas, restaurants continue trading despite thousands more COVID cases every day. Melbourne's Keser owns successful cafes both in Melbourne and Paris, where daily cases have hit almost 27,000. While its successful Hardware Societe cafes have been closed in Melbourne, her Paris outpost remains open. Di joins me now at some very late hour in Europe. Welcome to Bread and Butter, Di.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Really well. I have to say, this Melburnian is a bit jealous of your freedoms over there while you're visiting in Europe. I'm sure there are challenges, though. How's your Paris cafe going?
Revenues are down 60%. So from that perspective, it's pretty tough. We're trading 5 days a week now versus 7 before COVID. So we, in France, we have a unemployment system. So some of our staff get laid off partially for a period of time. So we've been able to offset some of our wages costs through that, but there's no break-even point where we are right now. And being at the Butte of Sacré-Cœur, that's a highly touristic area in Paris, and there's just no tourists, so it's pretty tough.
I bet it is. So you've taught Parisians the joys of the Melbourne brunch. Has it been going well until you hit COVID?
Oh, it was fantastic. I mean, we were full all the time. I mean, Sundays is a big day for the French to get out and have brunch, so Sundays is a solid day, but unfortunately Sundays can't carry us through the rest of the week either. So it's relatively challenging, and it's not just us. The whole of Montmartre is basically had an atom bomb dropped on it right now. It's a tough period.
So your French leaders over there are insisting on trade continuing. What sort of rules or regulations are in place to keep customers and staff safe?
Well, to be frank with you, with the numbers that we've got in France right now, that restaurants shouldn't be open. It's as simple as that. I have consulted with our accountants, and they have basically said that unfortunately we're not in a position to get chômage for our staff, and if we close, it's at our cost, and we can't afford to do that. So the fact of the matter is French labour laws are very different to Australian labour laws, and whilst you can lay somebody off in Australia, you can't do that in France. So that that makes it really, really difficult trying to plan at the moment. I think that the French government don't want to chômage restaurants because it is too expensive, and financially there's a lot of fraught business. They're saying at least 25% of restaurants are going to go down the gurgler in France before Christmas, and that wouldn't surprise me at all.
There are very similar predictions here in Melbourne, and you're in regular contact with your Melbourne team for Hardware Society.
Yeah, always.
How are they coping with well, not having any work to do?
Well, that's we've probably for the last month been planning new menus. We've been doing recipe testing, trying to get all of those things set in place. But at the same time, I think it's disheartening. You know, no one's got a purpose. You can only spend so much time at home, and unfortunately, Melbourne's lockdown has been longer and more arduous than almost anywhere else in the world. I mean, we endured probably 3 and a bit months in Spain, but at least you guys could go out for exercise, because we couldn't do that. The only way we could go out was to walk our dogs, so we had a get out of jail card free that other guys didn't have. But you know, everyone's just yearning to get back into some form of normality. I mean, looking at the footage at the moment, the city's just it's heartbreaking to watch.
Yeah, look, it is very quiet, and both of your venues are in the CBD. At the moment, as you know, there's a mayoral race in the city of Melbourne, and local council elections, and the hospitality industry has become a hot topic in the political toing and froing with what candidates are promising. What would you like to see happen in the laneways where your cafes are?
Well, for starters, I think the red tape just needs to be cut. I mean, if in France, which is probably one of the most bureaucratic countries in the world, if they can manage to get outside dining permits issued and for people to be able to take space over very easily, I do not understand why it is so hard in Melbourne. I mean, the fact of the matter is we're in a laneway that has, well, we're in two laneways. One is open to traffic. One's been closed half the year during construction. So why they can't close that off, I do not understand, and why they will not return our phone calls and they don't want to assist us remains a mystery to me. I mean, hospitality is the lifeblood of the CBD, and if you're not going to support these businesses, you're not going to get revenue. It's as simple as that, and there's just not going to be people in the city anymore. So from our perspective, we need the City of Melbourne to start waking up to themselves and realising that we actually need the support and the help to get through this, and giving us 8 seats out the front of a 110-seat restaurant is not support. That's just insulting.
I can't believe you haven't had anyone return your calls. I mean, I know the council's going to a bit of a lockdown mode themselves during an election, but you'd imagine that the candidates would be very keen to hear your story.
Well, Aaron, our GM, he's been in contact with the City of Melbourne. Basically, everything is just too difficult. I mean, we would like a laneway closed off at Catherine Place, which sits to the side of our building. Trying to get somebody to assist us with that is just nigh impossible. The same for Hardware Street. You think about all of those cafes, that we could close off a huge section of that street just so people could actually trade safely, but not all too hard. And it's heartbreaking to watch.
So do you think the promises being made by current Lord Mayor Sally Capp about making Melbourne this thriving outdoor dining area are a bit hollow?
Oh, absolutely. It's more than hollow. It's just trying to get votes, but they're not doing anything to actually help our businesses. Nothing whatsoever. They don't understand the predicament we're in. I mean, we've got huge rents, massive rents. These rents are not sustainable in these environments. You're just going to see restaurants closing left, right, and centre unless somebody pulls the finger out of their ass and does something in a hurry, because people are hemorrhaging money. It's as simple as that.
Is there anything else apart from extended outdoor trading that you'd like to see the local and state governments do?
I think we need to look at free parking in the CBD. We need to get people into the city during the week. You know, people are going to be working from home from an extended period of time. In the UK, they run a really successful program where people would be given a rebate from the government to go and dine at restaurants. in their local areas, and that was from Monday to Wednesday. The city's going to need it Monday to Friday because, as you can see, it's a ghost town. The fact is, for a business like ours, it's not sustainable to be using delivery services and paying 30 to 35% to companies like Uber and Deliveroo. So it's actually cheaper for us to be closed than it is to remain open in a takeaway environment. So there's lots of things that need to be done.
You're in Europe now. You're stuck there ostensibly. Like, do you want to come back to Melbourne?
We were never going to be living back in Melbourne permanently. We would be in Melbourne 4 or 5 times a year, as I'm sure you know. But of course, I yearn to see my family. And, you know, my parents are in their 80s. I miss our team immensely. Will misses his family just like I do. It's difficult, but at the same time, you know, we have a life here. Our dogs are here. We can't just throw them on a plane, stick them in quarantine in Melbourne, and then, you know, what happens next? I mean, we relocated cities a month before lockdown, so it's been a wild ride.
I bet it has. And I imagine the dogs would be out of quarantine before you would.
Ironic, isn't it?
Absolutely. Di Keser, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you over in Europe. I hope things continue to improve for you on both fronts. Well, continue might be a bit of a stretch, but wishing you all the best of luck.
Nice talking to you, Wendy. Take care and have a lovely day.
Yeah, you too. That was Di Keser, owner of the Hardware Society cafes here in Melbourne and in Paris. Back here in Melbourne, there's no sign of reopening the hospitality industry in the near future, with the Victorian government's roadmap pegged to case numbers rather than dates. But there are members of Melbourne's hospitality industry investing in research to find a way out. Hospo co-working space Worksmith has joined forces with tech company HungryHungry to run research projects with the University of Canberra, with a focus on customer behaviour in restaurants and cafes and bars. I'm joined now by University academic Dr. Rob Weston, who's also the General Manager at Worksmith. Welcome to Bread and Butter, Rob.
Hi, Wendy. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. The research surveyed customers in August this year about how they feel about going out to dine. So were you surprised by any of the findings?
I can't say I was surprised. I think, especially with the second lockdown, which we were in the middle of when that survey was conducted, there's a definite response, and you can see it in the answers of the respondents, that they are ready to socialise, and that's one of the key things. Above all others around experience and atmosphere, socialisation is the key thing, and that's what people are looking for when they're coming back to hospitality venues.
So they want to get out, they want to eat out.
Yes, yeah, that's absolutely right. Notwithstanding some other trends in terms of what we did see was that people are, from the idea of not being able to eat out, so decreasing spend or decreasing that intention to dine in, early after the lockdown sort of finished the first time, and that intention going forward as well will be less dining in and more shopping at the supermarkets and doing or getting pre-prepared meals. So there's sort of a shift that there's probably about 10% decrease in dining when the restrictions open, and that's a COVID normal world. And then that sort of shift will be more towards the eating in the house aspect. So I guess that shift that might have already been there due to Netflix and that homebody experience that was sort of starting to creep in, I guess that will be, restaurateurs and operators will have to consider the home-cooked meal is the competitor, maybe less so than the shop next door, but actually more of now people are looking for that experience at home. So I think that's why Providore probably has been quite successful through this period.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, actually. Like, for the restaurants that have invested in creating cook-at-home meals that have a restaurant flair about them, do you think that's still a good investment, considering that people have said that they still want to go out?
Yeah, really good question. And I feel like that's where some extra research will need to be done. But I think I think that experience side is that the key to that success. It's not just a pizza delivered from Uber Eats or Menulog. It's you're trying to bring that experience from, and I'm going to use the example of Supernormal because I've actually used Providore to get that. But actually bring that and actually having that experience in the house. So you've got that connection. And that's really key, I think, during this period is connecting with your customers, because you're not going to connect with them in a physical sense. They can get that experience. And that is part of, I guess, the key to the hospitality industry in Melbourne is that world-renowned experience, atmosphere that's been created over such a long period of time. So it's hard to say. I know from talking to a lot of operators, they're intending to continue to offer this Providore offering, and they want to see how that works. But the hardest part now is that the Providore offering is that you take orders and you prepare it for delivery. And so they're currently utilising their restaurants in a way to facilitate that. But once we start to move to this idea of reopening outdoor dining, and hopefully potentially indoor dining, they'll actually need that prep space to do those meals for people coming in. So they are actually now needing to look for alternative spaces to actually facilitate that. It's not necessarily going to be viable given normally the size of the commercial kitchens and the footprints within a restaurant, that they'll actually be able to still provide that offering out of that space.
So perhaps even more dark kitchens might pop up to deal with both, because from what I've heard, restaurateurs don't want to give up that new revenue stream from people dining at home.
That's what I'm hearing as well from the people I've been speaking to in the industry. But where they've been operating out of won't work if they have to reopen, because they just won't have the physical space and capability to do that long term. So it's then going to put a strain on people looking for alternative spaces to actually operate out of. So it could be like you said, a dark kitchen, and potentially some restaurateurs might actually partner together to actually utilise a commercial kitchen space.
There's also a suggestion in the research that CBD restaurants should consider moving or expanding into the suburbs to capture more customers, the CBD being virtual ghost town at the moment. Can you tell us more about that?
Some really interesting research based on some Google Analytics, but also Roy Morgan research that we also looked at, showed that if we look at Perth and Brisbane, places that have actually gone through quite well through this COVID experience, what they've actually found is that if we look back at February, the numbers of people moving through the city are actually sort of 75% and above back to normal. So not back to the pre-foot traffic that we did see previously, but there is that ability to start getting people in. I think the really interesting findings by Rob Morgan, also McKinsey, was that in Melbourne, what we're seeing from an office vacancy perspective is actually significantly higher compared to, I guess, the difference, so I should say. So from pre-COVID to the second quarter, so through that April to June period, actual office vacancies has actually increased more than any other city on a percentage basis, indicating that there's going to be less permanent people, office workers coming into the city. And so what that indicates is that for restaurants and cafes, bars, etc. in the city, you're going to have less foot traffic, so you're going to be competing for the people that are in the city. Some anecdotal evidence from talking to some cafe owners and restaurateurs in Melbourne that have spaces outside of the city of Melbourne and also in, is that some of the cafes outside in the suburbs are actually break-even or profitable and almost back to numbers they were seeing pre-COVID, whereas in the city it's untenable. Essentially, you can't even pay for a staff member. That's not even counting overheads or the cost of food. So they've just said, well, at this point, we can't open. But the hard part is, if I'm in the city at the moment today, if there's no shops open, then I'll bring my lunch in, therefore I won't shop. And so it's this vicious circle. And so I think the City of Melbourne trying to do things and encourage people to come in is great, but it needs to be a really well thought out roadmap. for that reopening, because if businesses all don't open, then if I come into the city, where do I go? Really, the only things that open are the fast food chains, so like a Nando's. That's the closest thing to us, and a coffee shop that's open.
But
So
look, there
it's
are
pretty
glimmers,
depressing.
though. There are glimmers of hope in this research that I can see, that restaurant patrons might not eat out as often in the future, but they say they're prepared to spend more money when they do go.
Yeah, which is the good thing. I think the thing that I think we all know is the hospitality industry is heavily regulated. So some of that research was around the COVID safe plans, and 80% of people wanting to see that in place. There was also indications that 30% want to be able to see into the kitchen. I think that's probably that fear of what we've seen of, especially this second wave of indoors. What's going on? I want to see visibility of how clean things is. But from the food side of things, everything is actually well regulated from a food safety perspective. But I think it's those hygiene factors, and excuse the pun, of just making sure the spaces are visibly have the, how many numbers, have we got safe social distancing in place and masks on and those sorts of things. But the exciting thing is that if we can get through that, and if there's the consumer confidence that people have still got jobs and are confident they will have their jobs, then they are looking like that they will go back to restaurants, maybe less, and this comes back to that point about wanting to cook more at home. But the idea is that when they go out, they're looking to socialise with friends, they're looking to have that experience. And so it's more likely that they're not looking to rush in and rush out because restrictions will probably stop people from doing too many of those things where it's larger crowds. And so it is looking for that experience of, we're going out to a restaurant, let's make a night of it. And
now,
so that
speaking of an experience, you run a co-working space, which of course has been severely hampered by COVID, because co-working is not where it's at right now. But does it look like Worksmith might be able to continue on in some capacity in the next little while?
Yeah, absolutely. Other co-working spaces in Melbourne have remained open. We made the choice because all of our members in the hospitality industry, that knowing that we would be the hardest industry hit, it didn't make sense for us to try and force fees on people that were going to struggle. That's sort of the experience that we're seeing from other co-working spaces. So we made that decision quite early to suspend memberships to support the industry, and that we've been focusing on doing research like what we're talking about today, and other initiatives like the Australian Hospitality Relief Fund. But the idea is that we're looking to open as soon as the restrictions ease. So our spaces have all been prepared now; they're COVID safe.
Well, as a Worksmith member, Rob, I'm really looking forward to it, and I really appreciate your time. I know that there's more research on the way, and I look forward to finding out what you guys come up with. Thank you so much for your time today.
Great, thanks, Wendy.
That was Dr. Rob Weston, General Manager at Hospo Community Group and Open Plan Working Space, Worksmith, which I must say is a fabulous space, and I'm a member there myself. My next guest is living proof of the resilience of people working in the hospitality industry. He's a respected chef who owns a winery in the Yarra Valley, a winery restaurant in the Yarra Valley, which is now in lockdown. But he's used the time to grow a spectacular veggie garden and launch a whole new business. I'm talking about Paul Cooper, owner of Yarra Valley's Bianchet Winery restaurant, and now a new catering arm called Edge Hospitality. Welcome to Bread and Butter, Paul.
Thank you for having me, Wendy. Pleasure to be here.
Mate, look, it's great to see you. I love how you've found silver linings in the lockdown, including this range of home-delivered healthy meals that you're doing. Tell us how that came about.
It's born of something that I wanted to do prior to COVID coming into what is COVID, I suppose, the lockdown. Being a little opportunistic like I am, I wanted to utilise the time to be something that would last after the whole COVID scenario and help people. I went through a few injuries a few years back, and the first lockdown in particular, I didn't look after myself that well, so started feeling a lot of pain in arthritis from that accident I had, and realised that it's the way I treated my body and what I was putting into my body that was causing that pain. So the idea here is to help other people in a similar scenario to me.
It's true. Like sometimes what the food that you can eat can create massive stress in your joints and that sort of thing. Is that where you're looking at doing reducing inflammation in the body through food?
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of anti-inflammatory stuff, lower carb sort of style food, so no refined carbs. I think that's probably one of the bigger factors here is that the pastries and all the wonderful stuff that we love to eat. I was too much of it in the first lockdown and felt a lot of pain from that.
I think there are a lot of people in the same boat, myself included. But I have to say, I've tried plenty of healthy meal solutions in frozen packs, and they're pretty much devoid of flavour. So how do you plan to tackle that?
Well, that was one of the things that I found as well, and really thought that there was a market there for people who wanted really healthy food that was full of flavour. And by keeping it fresh, so we're not freezing the food down, we're delivering it 2 times per week so that all the food can be served fresh. And that way you don't lose all those flavours by freezing it. And we use lots of herbs, lots of spices, and no bad oils. So we don't use canola oils, we don't use cottonseed oils or vegetable oils. It's always the good olive oils or coconut oils in order to try and lower that inflammation in people's body, but at the same time, keep the food as full of flavour as possible.
Now, it just crossed to some vision of you tending your veggie patch, and it just looks like such a beautiful place to be locked down. Like the Yarra Valley, like Melbourne, is in full lockdown. Tell us what it's like living in the Yarra Valley in lockdown.
It's really bizarre. We're called Metro Melbourne, but I look to my left, I look to my right, and we've got horses, we've got farms, we've got vines everywhere. It really doesn't make much sense that we're called Metro Melbourne, but it is a very relaxing spot to spend some time. We love to come here as a family and just relax as well. So it is a great area of the world.
That's fantastic. Now, you've worked in some top restaurants in Melbourne and Sydney and done amazing things in your career. Did you ever imagine that you'd be making home delivered meals to like reduce inflammation?
It was never something that I was striving to do, let's say 5 years ago. So I worked, spent a good time in London, Spain, France. And in that time, I was just all about doing the high-end food and producing the best food I could without too much care about what I was cooking with. But then, as I mentioned, time in Sydney, I had a pretty serious bike injury, a push bike, where I broke an elbow, damaged a knee, damaged 2 shoulders. And after that, it really made me open my eyes to what you put into your body.
It would make you open your eyes to a hell of a lot of things, I imagine. So
yeah, there was a lot of mental health issues too in there.
No, I'm sure. Like mental health is a massive issue in all industries at the moment. So if people want to try your healthy meals, how do they get in touch with you?
So you can do it through our website, progressfoodcompany.com.au, or you can contact us here at the Winery Restaurant at Bianchet, Yarra Valley. So we're more than happy to. There's also the Instagram account and the Facebook page that you can contact us through.
Okay. So, and I have to say also, I've tried your new range of ketchups, which I find a bit annoying because it should be called sauce, but it's absolutely delicious. You've got a providore happening at the winery as well. So can people get access to the produce that you're coming up with there as well online? Absolutely.
So the ketchups are all available on the Bianchet website, which is bianchetwinery.com.au. With the ketchups, this was something we did before Progress Food, and we were looking to really go back to the old school ketchups.
Mate, I'm really sorry. I think we have to devote an entire other show to the difference between sauce and ketchup because I've run out of time now.
Probably.
I'm really sorry that I have to cut you off. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Paul.
No, pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That was Paul Cooper, chef and owner of Bianchet Winery and Edge Hospitality. You've been watching Bread and Butter, brought to you by HungryHungry. I'm Wendy Hargreaves, and I'll be back with you next week with more news from behind the scenes of the food and drink business. Until then, stay safe and eat well.
Stream us live on the Ticker app, Apple TV, Facebook, Twitter,